All right. Hello again. Let's start chapter 4, a really important chapter. You'll see why. So, chapter 4 starts and says, "The next morning I saw dawn for the first time. It began not as the gorgeous fanfare over the ocean I had expected, but as a strange gray thing, like sunshine through burlap. I looked over to see if Phineas was awake. He was still asleep, although in his drained light he looked more dead than asleep. The ocean looked dead too, dead gray waves hissing mordantly along the beach, which was gray and dead-looking itself. I turned over and tried to sleep again, but couldn't, and so lay on my back looking at the gray burlap sky. Very gradually, like one instrument after another being tentatively rehearsed, the beacons of color began to pierce the sky. The oceans perked up a little from the reflection of these colored slivers in the sky. Bright high lights shone on the tips of waves, and beneath its gray surface I could see lurking a deep midnight green. The beach shed its deadness and became spectral gray-white, then more white than gray, and finally it was totally white and stainless, as pure as the shores of Eden. Phineas, still asleep on his dune, made me think of Lazarus, brought back to life by the touch of God. Tons of nice imagery there, you all, and an allusion with an A, allusion, to the Bible, of course. We all know, about Garden of Eden, but also Lazarus, things like that. I didn't contemplate this transformation for long. Inside my head, for as long as I could remember, there had always been a sense of time ticking steadily. I looked at the sky and the ocean and knew it was around 6:30. The ride back to Devon would take 3 hours at least. My important test, trigonometry, was going to be held at 10 o'clock. Uh-oh. Phineas woke up talking. That was one of the best nights' sleep I ever had. When did you ever have a bad one? The time I broke my ankle in football. I like the way this beach looks now. Shall we have a morning swim? Are you crazy? It's too late for that. What time is it anyway? Finney knew I was a walking clock. It's going on 7 o'clock. There's time for just a short swim. And before I could say anything, he was trotting down the beach, shedding clothes as he went, and into the ocean. I waited for him where I was. He came back after a while, full of chilly glow and energy and talk. I didn't have much to say. Do you have the money? I asked once, suddenly suspecting that he had lost our joint 75 cents during the night. Remember, y'all, this story takes place right now in what time? 1942. So 75 cents back then would be a decent amount of money. It'd be like you and your friend going out somewhere and you had, I don't know, $10, something like that. Well, maybe not that much. I have to look it up, actually, how much that is. But way more than it is today. There was a search, a hopeless one, in the sand, and so we set off on the long ride back without any breakfast, and got to Devon just in time for my test. I flunked it. I knew I was going to as soon as I looked at the test problems. It was the first test I had ever flunked. So maybe a little bit of thing there, maybe a little bit more resentment, because Phineas is the one that convinced him to go to the beach and go swimming, and then the next morning, when Jean is all stressed out, as, I think a lot of us would be stressed out, like, oh my gosh, I got to get back, I got to study for this test. Oh my gosh, I just slept on a beach all night instead of, studying. Phineas is like, I'm just going to go for a swim for a little bit. Phineas is such a laid back, no worries kind of guy, basically, that he probably didn't understand why Jean would be stressed out about this. But Finney gave me little time to worry about that. Right after lunch, there was a game of blitzball, which took most of the afternoon, and right after dinner, there was a meeting of the Super Suicide Society of the summer session. That night in our room, even though I was worn out from all the exercise, I tried to catch up on what had been happening in trigonometry. You work too hard, Finney said, sitting opposite me in the table where we read. The study lamp cast a round yellow pool between us. You know all about history and English and French and everything else. What good will trigonometry do you? I'll have to pass it to graduate, for one thing. Don't give me that line. Nobody at Devon has ever been surer of graduating than you are. You aren't working for that. You want to be head of the class, valedictorian, so you can make a speech on graduation day, in Latin or something boring like that probably, and be the boy wonder of the school. I know you. Don't be stupid. I wouldn't waste my time on anything like that. You never waste your time. That's why I have to do it for you. Anyway, I grudgingly added, somebody's got to be the head of the class. You see, I knew what you were aiming at, he concluded quietly. Phooey. Phooey's like an old expression, you all. That's ridiculous. And of course, this is true. Jean puts on a front, kind of lies about a lot of stuff as far as, that's not what I really think. That's not who I really am. But deep down, that is what he thinks. He wants to be valedictorian. That's fine. That's a good goal. But Phineas is the one kind of saying, yeah, but I have to drag you along to have fun because otherwise you'd never have fun. You're too serious. All you want to do is study. What if I was? It was a pretty good goal to have, it seemed to me. After all, he should talk. He had won and been proud to win the Galbraith football trophy and the Contact Sport Award, and there were 2 or 3 other athletic prizes he was sure to get this year or next. If I was the head of class on graduation day and made a speech and won the Ne Plus Ultra Scholastic Achievement citation, then we would both come out on top. We would be even, that was all. We would be even. There it is again, you all, that rivalry. He can't compete with Phineas athletically, so he's going to be his rival academically. Well, Phineas is a great athlete, I'm going to be a great student. And, that's okay. If you want to have a rivalry like that, it's not a big deal. It's good for both of you all, fine, whatever. As long as you don't do anything bad with it. What was that? My eyes snapped from the textbook toward him. Did he notice the sudden glance shot across the pool of light? He didn't seem to. He went on writing down his strange curlicue notes about Thomas Hardy and Phineas Shortham. Was that it? Oh, sorry, was that it? My bad, y'all. With his head bent over the lamplight, I could discern a slight mound in his brow above the eyebrows, a faint bulge which is usually believed to indicate mental power. Phineas would be the first to disclaim any great mental power in himself. But what did go on in his mind? If I was the head of the class and won that prize, then we would be even. His head started to come up and mine snapped down. I glared at the textbook. Relax, he said. Your brain will explode if you keep this up. You don't need to worry about me, Finney. I'm not worried. You wouldn't. I wasn't sure if I had the control to put this question. You wouldn't mind if I wound up the head of the class, would you? Mind? 2 clear green-blue eyes looked at me. Fat chance you've got anyway, with Chet Douglas around. But you wouldn't mind, would you? I repeated in a lower and more distinct voice. He gave me that half-smile of his, which had won him 1,000 conflicts. I'd kill myself out of jealous envy. I believed him. The joking manner was a scream. I believed him. In front of my eyes, the trigonometry textbook blurred into a jumble. I couldn't see. My brain exploded. He despised the possibility that I might be the head of the school. There was a swift chain of explosions in my brain. One certainty after another blasted up. Up like a detonation went the idea of any best friend. Up went affection and partnership and sticking by someone and relying on someone. Absolutely in the jungle of a boys' school went the hope that there was anyone in this school, in this world, whom I could trust. Chet Douglas, I said uncertainly, is it a sure thing for it? Gene just thinks he's realized something. He's had a epiphany. He's like, oh, Phineas has been doing all this stuff to distract me from studying, so therefore I won't be class valedictorian, and he'll always be better than me, is what he's thinking. And a nice little metaphor right here, you all, talking about relying on someone absolutely in the jungle of a boys' school. Well, boys' school can be kind of a scary, dangerous kind of place as far as socially, so saying the school is a jungle is a metaphor. My misery was too deep to speak anymore. I scanned the page. I was having trouble breathing, as though the oxygen were leaving the room. Amid its devastation, my mind flashed from thought to thought, despairing in search of something left which it could rely on. Not rely on absolutely, that was obliterated as a possibility. Just rely on a little, some solace, something surviving in the ruins. I found it. I found a single sustaining thought. The thought was, you and Phineas are even already. You are even in enmity. Enmity is don't like each other. You are both coldly driving ahead for yourselves alone. You did hate him for breaking that school swimming record, but so what? He hated you for getting an A in every course but one last term. You would have had an A in that one except for him. Except for him. Then a second realization broke as clearly and bleakly as dawn at the beach. Nice simile there. Finney had deliberately set out to wreck my studies. That explained Blitzball. That explained the nightly meetings of the Super Suicide Society. That explained his insistence that I share all his diversions. The way I believe that you're my best friend blabberer. That shadow falling across his face if I didn't want to do something with him. His instinct for sharing everything with me. Sure, he wanted to share everything with me, especially his procession of D's in every subject. That way he, the great athlete, would be ahead of me. It was all cold trickery. It was all calculated. It was all enmity. Aha. So now Gene's found the truth, or what he thinks is the truth. I felt better. Yes, I sensed it would be like the sweat of relief when nausea passes away. I felt better. We were even, after all, even in enmity. The deadly rivalry was on both sides, after all. I became quite a student after that. I had always been a good one, although I wasn't really interested and excited by learning itself, the way Chet Douglas was. Now I became not just good, but exceptional, with Chet Douglas my only rival in sight. But I began to see that Chet was weakened by the very genuineness of his interest in learning. He got carried away by things, for example. He was so fascinated by the tilting planes of solid geometry that he did almost as badly in trigonometry as I did myself. When we read Candide, you'll read that in high school, when we read Candide, it opened up a new way of looking at the world to Chet, and he continued hungrily reading Voltaire in French. That's impressive. While the class went on to other people. He was vulnerable there because, to me, they were all pretty much alike. Voltaire and Molière and the laws of motion and the Magna Carta and the pathetic fallacy and Tess of D'Urbervilles, and I worked indiscriminately on all of them. In other words, y'all, Gene is very smart, obviously, but he doesn't really enjoy learning. He doesn't really like any of his classes. It's all just work for him now for a goal. To be number one, to be valedictorian because he wants to beat Phineas. This other guy, Chet Douglas, he's very smart too, but he also enjoys learning. He wants, he reads something cool in history, so he reads one of those books to read more about that subject. A book not for class. So he's saying because of that, Chet can never really pull that far ahead of him because Chet's distracted by actually enjoying learning stuff. Whereas Gene just does his assignment and move on, does his assignment, move on, does his assignment, move on, because he wants this one goal. Finney had no way of knowing this because it all happened so far ahead of him scholastically. In class, he generally sat slouched in his chair, his alert face following the discussion with an expression of philosophical comprehension. And when he was forced to speak himself, the hypnotic power of his voice combined with the singularity of his mind to produce answers which were often not right but could rarely be branded as wrong. So in other words, Phineas can talk in class too. He doesn't know the answer. He doesn't know what's going on. So he talks around it to give some sort of answer that sounds like it could be correct. Yeah, there you go. I'm sure none of you guys have ever done that before in class. Written tests were his downfall because he could not speak of them. And as a result, he got grades which were barely passing. It was that he never worked. It wasn't that he never worked, because he did work, in short, intense bouts now and then. As that crucial summer wore on, and I tightened the discipline on myself, Phineas increased his bouts of studying. I could see through that. I was more and more certainly becoming the best student in the school. Phineas was, without question, the best athlete. So in that way, we were even. But while he was a very poor student, I was a very good athlete. And when everything was thrown onto the scales, they would in the end tilt definitely toward me. The new attacks of studying were his emergency measures to save himself. I redoubled my effort. Now this weird thing is going on, y'all. These two guys, remember, they're supposed to be best friends. They live in the same room. They're roommates. They do everything together every day. They're in classes all day. They have their little society at night where they're jumping off the tree, going on adventures together, all that stuff. But Gene's saying that they're also in constant competition with each other. And Gene is always keeping score. Yeah, Phineas is the best athlete in the school, but a bad student. I'm a great student, maybe the best student in the school, and I'm a pretty good athlete. Therefore, I'm better than Phineas, like that. It was surprising how well we got along in these weeks. Sometimes I found it hard to remember his treachery. Sometimes I discovered myself thoughtlessly slipping back into affection for him again. It was hard to remember when one summer day after another broke with a cool effulgence over us, and there was a breath of widening life in the morning air, something hard to describe, an oxygen intoxicant, a shining northern paganism, some odor, some feeling so hopeless promising that I would fall back in my bed on guard against it. It was hard to remember in the heady and sensual clarity of these mornings. I forgot whom I hated and who hated me. I wanted to break out crying from stabs of hopeless joy, or intolerable promise, or because these mornings were too full of beauty for me, because I knew too much of hate to be contained in a world like this. Summer lazed on, little personification there you are. No one paid any attention to us. One day I found myself describing to Mr. Prudhomme how Phineas and I had slept on the beach, and he seemed to be quite interested in that, in all the details, so much so that he missed the point, that we had flatly broken a basic rule. No one cared, no one exercised any real discipline over us, we were on our own. I'm going to take a break there for a second, you all, to rest my voice, and I'll make another video here in a little bit and upload that too, and we'll do the next half of the chapter.